What do you do when the life you knew turns to ash? For Eleanor Vance, a 43-year-old widow from Boston's high society, the answer was to run. She ran until the railroad tracks ended, with nothing but 2 carpet bags and a desperate hope sparked by a tiny newspaper ad for a cook on a remote Montana ranch. But the man who ran that ranch wasn't looking for just any cook. He was looking for something far stranger, something he called a seasoning of laughter. Before we follow Eleanor into the heart of the untamed West, take a moment to support our storytelling community. Hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss our next tale, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your support truly means the world. Now, let's see if Eleanor can find her place at the North Star Ranch. The stagecoach groaned to a halt, kicking up a cloud of ochre dust that settled over the single rutted street of Havenwood, Montana. Eleanor Vance clutched her worn bag, her knuckles white. Through the grimy window, the town looked less like a new beginning and more like the end of the world. At 43, with silver threading her dark hair and grief etched around her eyes, she was a stark contrast to the hopeful young settlers heading west. She was a refugee from a life that had crumbled into debt and disgrace after her husband's death. Stepping down from the coach, the dust immediately coated her black traveling dress, a somber reminder of the funeral that had set this desperate journey in motion. The town was a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the vast, empty prairie, a general store, a saloon called the Prospector's Dream, and a boarding house that looked tired of standing. Mountains, their peaks already dusted with snow, loomed in the distance. Eleanor felt the weight of every stare. Her refined posture and city clothes marked her as an outsider, as clearly as a brand on cattle. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward the general store, the newspaper clipping in her pocket feeling as thin and fragile as her hopes. It read simply, North Star Ranch seeks cook. Room and board provided. Inquire at Abernathy's General Store, Havenwood. Inside, the store was a dim, cluttered cavern of goods. A thin man with spectacles, Mr. Abernathy, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I'm here about the position at the North Star Ranch," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. Abernathy's gaze swept over her, from her neat bonnet to her impractical city shoes. "The cook position? Ma'am, that ad's been up for months. The North Star is 20 miles out. Rough country. Not exactly suitable for—" He gestured vaguely at her elegant, if weary, appearance. "I assure you I am quite capable of cooking," she lied, the words tasting like ash. In Boston, she'd had a staff for such things. But desperation was a powerful motivator. "It's not just the cooking." Abernathy sighed. "Silas Blackwood runs that place. He's a hard man in a hard land. No other women out there. Just prairie, cattle, and cowboys who've forgotten their manners." "I am a widow, Mr. Abernathy," Eleanor said, the truth of her situation laid bare. "I have nowhere else to go." Something in her voice must have softened him. He nodded slowly. "The supply wagon leaves at dawn. You can ride along, but you might want to buy some practical clothes. What you're wearing won't last a day." With the last of her money, Eleanor purchased 2 simple calico dresses and a pair of sturdy boots, a symbolic shedding of her former life. As she paid, Abernathy asked quietly, "What brings a lady like you out here?" "My husband left me with nothing but his debts," she said, the confession both shameful and liberating. "This was the only position that offered a roof over my head. Silas Blackwood. He keeps to himself," the storekeeper offered. "Came from down south years ago. Some say he's running from something. Fair boss, but he's got no time for nonsense. And they say his ranch house is as silent as a tomb." That night, in a small, clean room at the boarding house, Eleanor lay awake, listening to the alien sounds of the frontier. Tomorrow, she would journey into the wilderness to cook for a man shrouded in mystery and silence. She clutched the advertisement, that flimsy promise of a new beginning, and focused on the one thing that mattered: survival. The supply wagon jolted along a track that was more suggestion than road, plunging Eleanor deeper into an endless sea of golden prairie grass. When the North Star Ranch finally came into view, nestled in a bowl of low hills, her carefully rehearsed confidence evaporated. The main house was built of solid, unadorned logs. There were no flowers, no curtains, no sign that a woman had ever softened its harsh utility. A man emerged from the house as the wagon stopped. This was Silas Blackwood. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with a lean strength forged by labor, not leisure. His face was tanned, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a startling intensity. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, thumbs hooked in his belt, and simply studied her. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low baritone with a trace of a southern drawl. "You ever cook for 15 hungry men, Mrs. Vance?" "No, Mr. Blackwood, but I am a quick study. This isn't a schoolhouse." "I need a cook, not a student." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Then why has the position been vacant for 2 months?" A flicker of something, surprise, maybe even respect, crossed his face. "Because most folks are smart enough to know better. Ranch cooking is up at 4, breakfast at 5, dinner when they drag themselves in after dark. It's baking, butchering, and wrestling a wood stove that has a mind of its own." "Mr. Blackwood," she said, desperation sharpening her tone. 3 months ago I buried my husband and found I was penniless. I have learned that necessity is an excellent teacher." He stared at her for a long moment, then turned to the driver. "Bring her bags to the kitchen." He started toward the house, then paused. "It means you get 1 week. If you can't handle it, the wagon will take you back." He turned again, his gaze pinning her. "One more thing. The men here are good men, but they're rough. Keep to the house after dark and maintain a professional distance." "Perfectly clear," she said. He was almost at the door when he turned a final time. "You said you're willing to learn. Are you also willing to laugh?" The question was so unexpected it stole her breath. "I beg your pardon?" "This is a hard life, Mrs. Vance. The work breaks backs and the loneliness breaks spirits. The last cook we had looked like she was attending a funeral at every meal. It made everything heavier. So I'll ask again. Can you cook with laughter? Can you bring something besides food to that kitchen?" Eleanor thought of the society dinners she'd hosted, of keeping conversation flowing even as her own world was quietly falling apart. "Mr. Blackwood, I once entertained 20 Boston socialites for 3 hours after my cook quit without notice. I believe I can manage a few hungry cowboys." For the first time, she was certain she saw a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "The kitchen's through here. Dinner's at 6. That gives you 4 hours to figure out that stove and feed 15 men. Still want the job?" "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her new boots feeling steady on the dusty ground. Her first morning was a disaster. She woke to the acrid smell of smoke. The biscuits she'd put in the oven were charcoal bricks. The coffee had boiled over, dousing the fire and filling the kitchen with a sludgy, wet ash smell. In her panic, she knocked over the milk pail. "Damn this infernal stove," she muttered just as Silas appeared in the doorway. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I apologize, Mr. Blackwood. I set the dampers wrong." She gestured helplessly at the chaos. "The men will be here in 20 minutes, he said. His face unreadable. "I'll pack my things," she whispered, her brief hope turning to humiliation. "Did I say that?" He rolled up his sleeves. "Watch and learn." To her astonishment, he showed her how to bank the coals, how to read the stove's moods. "Pancakes," he declared, grabbing a bowl. "Faster than biscuits." They worked side by side, a silent, surprisingly efficient team. When the cowboys filed in, they found a hot breakfast waiting. And if they noticed their boss wiping flour from his hands, they were wise enough not to mention it. After they left, Silas returned carrying a worn cloth-wrapped book. "This belonged to my mother," he said, setting it on the table. "The recipes are simple. Good for a frontier kitchen." Eleanor opened it reverently. The pages were stained, the margins filled with a delicate feminine script. "This burns easy. Watch close," one note read. Another in faded ink made her pause. Silas's favorite, extra cinnamon. It was a ghost's loving instruction for a son she would never see grow old. Later that day, a commotion outside sent her running from the kitchen. Leo Finch, the friendly young cowboy who brought her firewood, was on the ground, clutching his arm. "Horse spooked," someone said. "Threw him hard. Bring him to the kitchen," Eleanor ordered, an old authority surfacing. Years as a doctor's wife had prepared her for this. She gently examined the arm. "It's a clean break. I can set it. You know how?" Leo asked through gritted teeth. "My husband was a physician. I assisted him many times." She took charge, sending men for splints and clean cloth. Silas appeared, his eyes wide with surprise, but he immediately fell in beside her, holding Leo steady. With a quick, sure movement, Eleanor pulled and aligned the bones. Leo's yell was sharp, but the arm was straight. She splinted it tightly, using strips torn from her last fine petticoat, a final practical sacrifice of her old life. Afterward, as she returned to her bread dough with shaking hands, Silas lingered. Where did a Boston lady learn to set bones? The truth slipped out before she could stop it. When you're married to a doctor who drinks too much, you learn to handle things when his hands aren't steady. The shameful secret hung in the air between them. Well, Silas said finally, his voice quiet. We're grateful for the skill, whatever brought it. He started to leave, then turned back. There's an apple pie recipe in my mother's book. Page 47. The men haven't had pie in months. It was both a challenge and an act of grace. That night, when she served the lopsided but edible pie, the cowboys' faces lit up. Even Silas's stern expression softened. Not bad, Mrs. Vance. Not bad at all. The sound of their laughter filled the kitchen, and for the first time, Eleanor felt like she might actually belong. The weeks folded into one another, and the kitchen, once a foreign and hostile territory, became Eleanor's domain. She learned the temperamental stove's moods. Her hands, once soft from a life of leisure, grew calloused and capable. Small changes began to appear, subtle markers of her presence. Checkered curtains, sewn from an old tablecloth, brightened the window. A jar of wildflowers, gathered on her walks, sat on the table. Bunches of wild mint she'd found behind the smokehouse hung from the rafters, filling the air with a clean green scent. The kitchen was no longer just a room with a stove. It was slowly becoming the heart of the home. The cowboys noticed. They began to linger after meals, their rough talk softening in her presence. They brought her small gifts, a comb of wild honey, a handful of pecans, a particularly plump prairie chicken. The oppressive silence Mr. Abernathy had spoken of was replaced by easy chatter and laughter. This place feels happy now, Leo Finch told her one morning, his arm healing nicely in its sling. It's just, sometimes I catch the boss looking at you when you're humming while you work. Like he's seeing a ghost, but a good one. A memory he'd forgotten he had. Before Eleanor could reply, Silas himself appeared in the doorway. He'd taken to visiting the kitchen for coffee before the other men arrived. These quiet moments had become a fragile, unspoken ritual between them. My wife, Sarah, he said suddenly one morning, staring into his cup as if the words were trapped there. She loved to sing while she cooked. Eleanor's hand stilled on the pie dough she was rolling. He'd had a wife. Cholera, he said, his voice flat with old pain. Took her and our daughter both while I was away on business. I came back to 2 fresh graves and a house full of echoes. I sold everything and came here, thinking a man could outrun his ghosts. He looked at her then, his winter sky eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it made her ache. But Tom's right. You've brought something back to this place, something I thought was gone for good. He set down his cup. There's a harvest dance in Havenwood next Saturday. The men are all going. The statement hung in the air. How nice for them, Eleanor said, her heart beating a little faster. You could come, he said, the invitation awkward and indirect. You need supplies from town anyway, don't you? Fabric for those curtains you mentioned. Some proper dishes? She was stunned that he'd noticed her casual complaints. Yes, supplies would be helpful. Then it settled. He paused, searching for the right words. And if you happen to stop by the dance hall? And if I happen to be there? And if the musicians happen to play something worth dancing to? Eleanor couldn't help but smile. That's a great deal of happenstance, Mr. Blackwood. Silas, he said quietly. In the evenings when it's just conversation. Call me Silas. That evening he brought her a package. This was my mother's, he said gruffly, thrusting it at her. Inside was a dress of deep blue wool, simple but beautifully made. For the next few nights, Eleanor sat by the lamplight, altering the dress, while Silas sat at the other end of the kitchen table, working on his account books. They rarely spoke, but the shared silence was comfortable, a companionship that needed no words. The night of the dance, Havenwood's community hall was alive with light and music. Eleanor's pies were devoured, and the local women, who had once eyed her with suspicion, now greeted her with warmth. She endured a few clumsy dances with eager young cowboys before retreating to the refreshment table, her feet aching, surviving the social whirl. Silas was beside her, a rare flicker of amusement in his eyes. Barely, she admitted. The musicians switched to a slow waltz. Eleanor felt him shift beside her. Would you, that is, if your feet have recovered? Are you asking me to dance, Silas? I'm suggesting that if you happen to be on the dance floor, and I happen to be there as well. Enough happenstance, she said, setting down her cup. Yes, I'd like to dance. He led her onto the floor. One hand settled at her waist, the other took hers, and she understood his caution. This was dangerous. Not for propriety's sake, but for the way her heart leaped when he pulled her into the rhythm of the waltz. He moved with a natural grace that spoke of a life before the ranch, a life of drawing rooms and polished floors. He guided her effortlessly, and she found herself relaxing, trusting his lead completely. You dance well for a cowboy, she murmured. You dance well for a cook, he countered. Then, more seriously, I haven't waltzed since Sarah died. I didn't think I remembered how. It's like riding a horse, I suppose. The body remembers even when the heart tries to forget. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Yes, exactly that. They danced in silence, moving as one while the town watched and whispered. Eleanor knew there would be talk, the stern rancher and the Boston widow, dancing as if they had the right. But wrapped in the warmth of Silas's careful hold, she couldn't bring herself to care. For the first time in a very long time, she felt not just safe, but truly, breathtakingly alive. The storm announced itself with a wall of black clouds that consumed the horizon, a monstrous churning force that made the vast Montana prairie feel small and fragile. It's going to be a bad one, Leo said from the kitchen doorway. Silas has most of the men moving the herd to the sheltered valley, but two of the boys, Bill and Frank, were riding the north pasture. They might not have seen it coming in time. Eleanor's mind, honed by years of managing a household and, more recently, a ranch kitchen, snapped into action. Then we prepare, she said, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even herself. This kitchen stays warm and ready. She dispatched the few remaining men to haul extra water and firewood while she began to cook. Her hands moved with purpose, mixing bread dough, starting a massive pot of stew, while her thoughts were miles away, out in the gathering darkness with Silas. The blizzard hit with the force of a physical blow. Rain turned to sleet, then to a blinding wall of snow driven by a wind that screamed like a banshee. The sturdy log house shuddered. The kitchen, Eleanor's warm sanctuary, suddenly felt like a tiny, fragile ship in a raging sea. Hours crawled by. Groups of cowboys stumbled in, soaked and half-frozen, sent back to safety by Silas, who refused to give up the search for his missing men. Each time the door opened, Eleanor's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and dread. She dispensed hot coffee, dry clothes, and bowls of stew, her calm demeanor a steady anchor in the chaos. The kitchen became a refuge, men sleeping in shifts on the floor while the storm howled outside. It was past midnight when a cry went up. A light! I see a light! Through the swirling snow, a lantern bobbed, then another. The door was thrown open, and 4 figures staggered in, so caked in ice and mud they were barely recognizable. It was Silas and another hand, supporting the 2 lost cowboys between them. Blankets, Silas ordered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Hot water. Bill's got a gash on his leg. Eleanor flew into action. Within minutes, she had the injured man on the kitchen table. The cut was deep, but she cleaned and stitched it with the same steady hands that had set Leo's arm, while Silas held the lantern, swaying on his feet. You need to sit, she told him firmly, before you fall over. He protested, but sank onto a bench, his strength finally giving out. When the last man was fed and settled, she approached him. He sat alone at the table, his coffee growing cold. You did well tonight, he said, his voice low. This kitchen. It was a safe harbor. Exactly what the men needed. It was just food and warmth, Silas. No, he said, his gaze intense. It's more than that. You turned this place into the heart of the ranch when trouble came. You made sure there was a light in the darkness. He stood, and for a moment she thought he would collapse. Thank you, Margaret. The slip, using her real name, which she must have told him in a quiet moment, felt dangerously intimate. You should thank me by getting some rest, she said, steering him toward the door to his empty part of the house. Go, I'll keep watch. As dawn broke, the storm eased, revealing a world transformed, buried under a blanket of white. Silas found her still in her chair by the stove, fresh coffee already brewing. They looked at each other across the messy, life-filled kitchen, the stern rancher and the Boston widow, both exhausted, both exactly where they needed to be, and for the first time, they shared a smile of true understanding. The ranch had barely begun to recover when the next crisis struck. A young cowboy, Ben Carter, the storekeeper's nephew, was gored by a bull. They carried him in, pale and bleeding, and laid him on the same kitchen table that served for meals and mending. The wound was deep and ragged. In Boston, there would have been a sterile operating room, chloroform, proper instruments. Here there was whiskey for antiseptic, boiled silk thread for sutures, and Eleanor's courage. "This is beyond me," she whispered to Silas, her hands trembling. "No, it's not," he said, his voice a bedrock of calm. "I'll be your hands. Just tell me what to do." For 2 hours, the kitchen became a surgical theater. Eleanor worked with a fierce, focused intensity, directing Silas, who followed her every command without question. The power dynamic had completely shifted. He was no longer the boss, and she was no longer the cook. They were partners in a desperate fight for a young man's life. They saved him. The days that followed were a blur of careful vigilance. They took shifts by Ben's bedside, and in the dim lamplight of the long nights, the last of their walls came down. He read Wordsworth aloud, his low voice a soothing balm. "After Sarah died," he confessed, "I swore I'd never be responsible for another person's life. But then you arrived." He finally looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "You've made me remember why I wanted to build something here in the first place." When Ben's fever finally broke and he woke, clear-eyed and complaining, they sagged against each other in shared relief. Standing on the porch in the cool morning air, his hands steadying her, Eleanor found herself leaning against his chest, the solid warmth of him a comfort she hadn't realized she craved. "We make a good team," he murmured into her hair. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "when this is over, we need to talk. About the future, about whether this is just a job, or if maybe it could be something more." A week later, with Ben on the road to a full recovery, Silas called Eleanor to his office. The formal request sent a chill of dread through her. Her 3-month trial was up. She followed him down the hall, her heart hammering against her ribs. He stood by the window, his back to her. "Your 3 months are over," he began. "Your work has been exemplary. You've handled emergencies that would send most people running. The question, Eleanor, is whether you want to continue in your current position." "Of course I do," she said, confused. "Unless you're dismissing me." "No." He turned, and she saw a surprising vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm asking if you want to remain as cook, with an increased wage, or—" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single deep blue sapphire. "Or you could consider a different position entirely," he said quietly. "As my wife." The room tilted. He moved to crouch before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I know it's sudden, but these past months, you've brought life back to this place, Eleanor. To me. You're a woman who faces down charging bulls and temperamental stoves with equal courage." "The stove was more frightening," she whispered, a shaky laugh escaping her. "I'm not the man your first husband was," he said, his voice earnest. "I won't hide from hard truths. This life is difficult, but I can promise you partnership, respect, and if you'll let me, love." Before she could answer, she knew she had to offer him the final, unvarnished truth of her past. "My husband didn't just leave me with debts," she said, her voice low. "He left me with the knowledge that our marriage was a lie. I came west not just for survival, but to find out who I was when everything was stripped away." "And who is she?" Silas asked softly. A real smile, bright and clear, broke through her tears. "She's a woman who can burn biscuits and learn from it, who finds joy in feeding hungry cowboys, and who," she met his gaze, "might be brave enough to love again, if the right man asked." "I'm asking," he said simply. "Then I'm saying yes." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of grief. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, he paused. "One condition. You have to promise to keep seasoning our life with laughter." "Silas Blackwood," she said, joy bubbling up inside her. "I promise to season our life with so much laughter you'll beg for a moment of quiet." "Never," he said firmly. "I've had enough quiet for a lifetime." Their wedding was on Christmas Day. The main room of the ranch house, which had been so stark and silent upon her arrival, was now transformed with pine boughs and filled with the entire ranch family and friends from town. The ceremony was simple, their vows spoken with a certainty that resonated deep in their souls. The feast that followed was a testament to the community they had built, A noisy, joyful celebration of second chances. As the party wound down, Jake stood, pulling Eleanor to his side. 6 months ago, he told their guests, this ranch was just a business. Then Eleanor arrived with her city ways and burning biscuits. He smiled down at her. She brought more than good cooking. She brought life back to this place. She reminded us that a house is just wood and stone until someone makes it a home. He raised his glass. To my wife, who seasons everything with joy. Later that night, as snow began to fall again, blanketing the prairie in a fresh, clean white, they stood together in their kitchen. The room that had witnessed her failures, her triumphs, and the slow, steady blossoming of their love. No more separate quarters, Silas said softly. No more careful distances. Just us. Just us, Eleanor agreed, her new name, Eleanor Blackwood, singing in her heart. This was what she had traveled west to find, though she hadn't known it. Not just survival, but a home. Not just a partner, but a love that knew how to laugh through hardship and hold tight through storms. The desperate widow from Boston was gone, transformed into a woman who knew her own strength, her own worth, and her own heart. And in the warm circle of her husband's arms, she knew she was finally, truly, home. If you enjoyed Eleanor and Silas's journey to finding each other, please show your support by liking this video, leaving a comment with your favorite moment, and subscribing for more tales of love and resilience. You can find another story right here in this playlist. Thank you for watching. Your support keeps these stories alive.